place, so check this. This is the hard knock life, but not the chica kind. More like the people in the world seeking perspectives with a different line. The kids who share their interests together with a similar kind. When they said John Glover for Spider-Man, they didn't mind. The activists, directors, comments and the lectures, fanboys, professional artists and professors. Maybe a nerd who's just like you, talking about the things that you like too. So I invite you to the N.O.C. In full color, you see me. The hard knock life, comics, movies and TV, yeah. Pop culture with a different perspective. Watch it on your screen, hit play, so check this.
We're back. It's the second episode of A Hard Knock Life. I am your host, Keith Chow, coming to you from Baltimore, Maryland. I wanted to thank everyone who checked out our first episode last week and where we talked about the summer movie season. We got another great show lined up for you tonight, a bunch of great guests, and we're going to transition from the big screen to the small screen and talk about a bunch of the Nerds of Color relevant television shows that are coming out this fall. We'll start off with my friend Jason Sperber, who is hailing from Bakersfield, California. He's the founder of the Rice Daddies blog, daddyinastrangeland.com. You can find him at Twitter on at dad_strangeland. And he's actually one of the people who has been pestering me about getting Nerds of Color started, so hopefully, Jason, you're happy with what we've accomplished these first couple weeks.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So welcome to the show. Are you excited about the television season? Are there a bunch of shows you're interested in?
Yeah, I watch way too much television.
How do you have time to watch TV?
DVR and lunchtime.
She wrote a School of Hard Knocks post about The Legend of Korra. She's a big Avatar fan. You can find her on Twitter at Julie Kang. Ladies and gentlemen, Julie Kang.
Hey, what's up?
How you doing?
I'm good. How are you, Keith?
I'm great. Your Korra post is blowing up the internets this morning.
I'm glad. I'm surprised, actually, at how few people actually watch the show. It basically consumes my life for half the year.
Well, you're a big fan of Avatar.
Yes.
Next up is someone who's new to the Nerds of Color. Hopefully you'll be seeing some more of his posts in the coming weeks, especially next week. We have a surprise that I'll announce at the end of the show about what next week on the Nerds of Color is going to be about. He is a Star Trek aficionado, big fan of Batman and comic books. He's also my brother from the same mother, Raymond Chow. I know you don't really watch a lot of TV, but do you feel prepared to talk about TV tonight?
Yeah, sure, why not?
You watch it enough.
Yeah.
So, the returning champion on the Hard Knock Life is back, even though he doesn't own a television. He's not cooking tonight. He's a criminology professor from Old Dominion University in Hampton, by way of Brooklyn. It's Shawn Smith. Welcome back, Shawn.
Well, yeah, hey. And I do own a TV. I don't own cable. There's a difference.
No, there is no difference.
No, okay, well, then. I own 2 monitors that have the capacity to provide me with a television signal if I so chose to.
Well, there you go. And in fact, if nothing else we've learned this summer, Netflix proves that you don't need a television to watch television.
Absolutely not.
A big little shout out to Netflix there. So let's get started. I mean, it's a big deal this season, in my opinion, as far as like someone like myself who is a huge comic book nerd, or more specifically a huge superhero comic book nerd, to have 2 television shows on at the same time.
I'm clearance level 6. I know that Agent Coulson was killed in action before the Battle of New York.
Welcome to level 7.
What is that?
That's a superhero, Agent Ward. We worked the cases S.H.I.E.L.D. hasn't classified. The strange, the unknown. It's not just spy versus spy anymore.
Raymond, you're a big comic book fan. You read the Avengers. What do you think we have to look forward to with the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.? Because I know the fanboy community is, chomping at the bit for the pilot episode that's debuting in a couple weeks.
Well, I mean, there's going to be a lot of interesting questions about how they approach it, because the S.H.I.E.L.D. Agency, it's all humans, right? So is this going to be a superhero of the week? And if so, does that, our metahuman of the week, does that mean that it's going to be people we recognize from the various properties in the 616 universe, or does it mean that, you know, the writers are going to come up with their own heroes? How are they going to be tweaking it? I just imagine tons and tons of arguing from the fanboys in the future about how true it's going to stay to the reality of 616.
Right, and really, like, does it have to? Because what Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is, the task that show has been given is that it's supposed to unify the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and so that means, you know, movies like Thor, movies like Captain America, Iron Man. This show exists on the periphery of those movies. How will Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. respond to the events of, say, Thor, which comes out later this year? Will it reference the events in Thor? Will it not? I mean, that's kind of the trick. I mean, you're a big Star Trek fan. I know that was one of the things about, you know, when First Contact came out, all the characters in Deep Space Nine had to change their uniforms, right? So, like, I guess it's been done before, but I guess not at this scale.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point, that, like, they're going to have all of these movie sets. Do they get to use them? And do they get to play? Do they get to play with all of the film property, you know, actual property, and use that to expand on, and do it for the 45-minute small screen? Because that's a huge advantage in terms of building that unified universe.
Julie, are you a fan of Joss Whedon at all?
I'm just an okay fan. I appreciate him. I haven't seen anything that I didn't like, especially of his, but for some reason, all my friends are huge Whedonites, so I just kind of pick things up by osmosis.
So that's interesting. Then how are your Whedon? I mean, because while this is primarily tied to the Marvel, you know, cinematic universe,
right?
It's also a Joss Whedon show. How do your Whedonite friends feel about? They're
basically chomping at the bit. The only thing that he could do better is to turn it into a musical. And then all of a sudden, like, Buffy comes in, and Nathan Fillion comes in to save the day or something. But yeah, no, people are looking really forward to it. I mean, with that kind of budget, with that kind of at least hypothetical access to all those sets, and maybe the actors, who knows?
Right.
I think it could be amazing.
And I don't think it's a spoiler to reveal that Colby Smulders, who played Agent Hill in the movie and is also one of the stars on CBS's How I Met Your Mother, is in the pilot episode at least. So there's that kind of connection already, that they can, you know, whether or not they can bring Sam Jackson in for an episode or two, probably not. I think Sam Jackson might be, for those of you who don't know, he plays Nick Fury in the movies. He may be a little bit outside of the budget, this hypothetical massive budget that they have at ABC.
Is that who I think it is?
She's just the pilot.
Melinda May is just the pilot.
Agent May, when you first meet her, she's in the offices.
I'm not going back in the field.
Agent Coulson recruits her.
Just need you to drive the bus.
From what I've read, Ming-Na's role was not written as an Asian American role, and she was cast in it. And Chloe Bennett, you know, is Hapa, and sometimes her roles are explicitly Hapa or Asian American, sometimes not. But, you know, I'm going to claim her. And and then, you know, then you have J. August Richards in the pilot. Whether or not he's around after that remains to be seen. I mean, you know, here's hoping that they do, you know, expand the universe. Especially as, from what I've read, in terms of, like, you know, are we going to see other known superhumans? The writers are sort of going along like, they're coming up with a story first, saying what kind of powered person they need, and then they consult with the Marvel experts to see who already exists, and then seeing who they can fit in. Then they're not like saying, oh, hey, let's fit in this character that already exists. They're working the other way around, and then going and doing the research.
But speaking of shows that feature superheroes, one show that probably is not as popular, will not be as popular because it's not on a real network, is a show called Arrow, which it will be starting its second season on the CW. which is that fake network I was talking about. Arrow, if you don't know, is about the adventures of the DC comic Archer, Green Arrow. And this season, along with introducing the Flash, which is a big deal, they're going to introduce the Flash into Arrow and spin him off into his own series. It was just announced that they'd cast the character of Amanda Waller. And if you visited the Nerds of Color this week, you may have seen I wrote a post about the history of Amanda Waller as portrayed in TV, movies, and cartoons. And they've added a new actress, Cynthia Addai-Robinson, to portray her.
I told you, I did not come back to Starling City to be the vigilante.
And I respect that.
I don't. I've made a few improvements down here.
My best friend died thinking that I was a murderer.
Do you think that a character like Amanda Waller can add any kind of import to what's going on in the milieu of what Arrow is?
I mean, potentially. I guess for me, the presentation of African American characters of relevance, period, and particularly female characters, generally is a good thing, just because of the lack thereof. I could say the same thing, quite frankly, about female characters, period, whether they be African American, Hispanic, Asian, or what have you. My understanding of the Waller character is that she has been presented in a number of vehicles, whether it be animated or whether it be live action. So obviously she's important enough in the DC milieu to be given a voice, whether it be in, again, if it's something like Justice League or if it's something like, in this case, Arrow. So yeah, I mean, in that respect, in that broader respect, I do think it's important. Now, that said, whether or not Cynthia can, stay true to the character along those lines, I mean, that remains to be seen. I am familiar with her work on Spartacus, and I think she's a fine actress. So, but yeah, I mean, really just the presentation of African American women in television, period, and of course, in this particular case, a superhero genre, certainly to me it's necessary for what few African American female characters of strength there are anyway. So.
Right, and I make the point in my post about how Amanda Waller is probably one of the more complex African American characters in the entire history of the DC Comics universe. And Jen's comment on my post kind of illustrates further is that the interesting thing about Amanda Waller as well is that she's always been depicted as not just a woman of color but a woman of size. Mm-hmm. And every incarnation that you've seen her character previously has reflected that. As you may or may not know, DC Comics a couple years ago rebooted their entire universe. They call it the New 52, and in doing so, they changed the appearance of many of the characters in the universe. And Amanda Waller was no exception. They've reduced her in size a great deal. They've made her essentially, they kind of Halle Berryed her in the comics, and I think casting Cynthia kind of reflects that. Past actresses who played her, someone like Pam Grier or even CCH Pounders, the voice actors who portrays her in the cartoon, they kind of reflected her appearance in the comics, and now they've kind of changed that. Raymond, my dislike of the New 52. Why do you think the DC decided to kind of go with what Jen calls like conventional beauty for a character like as Shawn said, who was probably one of the more complex and more interesting characters that DC has? Why would they have to muck with her appearance so much?
Well, for the comic books, I think it's editorials. The editorials, people who are following the news of the DC editorial staff right now kind of don't feel like DC editorial staff knows what the hell they're doing. So I think that people just kind of don't. I think it's easy to understand that it's easy to believe that Dan Didio doesn't understand why her presentation pre-52 as a big black woman is important. Right. And I think that so the idea of, well, why do you want conventional beauty? Because conventional beauty will sell. Because because DC is becoming increasingly bankrupt for ideas, so they're just trying to make people skimpier. They're just making all the women wear skimpier clothes. And so then you take that and you drop that into Arrow. I mean, I don't know how they're going to present Amanda Waller, but the reason that they've changed her, I mean, I think what they're skewing towards is they're making her younger and they're making her more attractive, right? Because it's Arrow, and that's on the CW, so everyone's going to be attractive.
Well, and Julie, I mean, I make the point in my post that, you know, a prior CW superhero show, Smallville, featured Amanda Waller, the character, fairly prominently, and she was portrayed by an older, you know, heavier actress. I mean, it's Pam Grier, so she's still sexy as hell, but she still reflects, and I think that's even more important. That shows that, like, you don't have to be stick thin to be, you know, considered beautiful or interesting.
Absolutely.
You know, and the CW does get dinged a lot for catering to a certain particular type of audience. But what do you think what message do you think that sends to just, you know, viewers in general?
It's just more of the same. I think it's not. The CW especially is basically Uncanny Valley Central, where the people start looking less and less like people and kind of more like mannequins, really attractive mannequins, who know how to party. But I, you know, it's slightly disappointing. But at this point, as a woman of size, I just look at her and say, oh, you know, another one bites the dust, I suppose.
Right.
They should probably have just asked Pam Grier back. I don't know what she's up to right now.
We don't want to get into my whole why do they even have to redo Arrow anyway, because, you know, you actually probably the only other person on the panel who watched an episode of Smallville. How do you feel about the kind of progression or regression of how at least she's depicted? And I don't want to, you know, prejudge Cynthia's take on it. I mean, she might be a brilliant Amanda Waller, but the aesthetic of casting, like Raymond said, a younger, quote-unquote, sexier actress to play the role.
I mean, I think it's interesting that, I mean, if you look at the demographics of the casting characters on Arrow, I mean, since they've aged her, it's not just that they've changed the way the character looks. They've aged the character down. It's a different dynamic because you have this generational thing going on in Arrow with, you know, the parental generation versus the you know, the kids generation. And so because the way they're presenting the storyline, they aged her down so that she is a peer of the main protagonist versus the protagonist's parents' generation. Right. And I think that's just that you know, yes, it's problematic in terms of lookism and that kind of thing, but it's also a storytelling choice that they made there.
Right, and I wonder, like, there's all this speculation about how, you know, now that Warner Brothers is trying to unify their cinematic universes in the same way that Marvel has done theirs, that maybe Arrow will be part of that as well, and that casting Amanda Waller here could signify how she might be depicted in future movies. But I don't know that works because, like you said, they've kind of CW'd her, and it kind of, I feel like this particular casting kind of, you know, dumps cold water on that notion that Arrow is part of the overall DC cinematic universe. But, you know, but as Shawn said, I think it is important whenever an actress of color is in the forefront. And I know that the casting of Amanda Waller made big news. So hopefully she has a fairly large, prominent. I mean, you know, for all we know, she's only on a couple episodes, and this is all for naught. But perhaps she'll have a pretty significant role on Arrow when it debuts on October 9th on the CW. Now, there is a show that's coming out fairly soon. It returns for its second season on September 13th on Nickelodeon. The Legend of Korra debuts on Nickelodeon on September 13th, which is just a few days away. Speaking of women of color who are prominent, she is a lead character who is brown. A point that you make, very eloquently in your Nerds of Color post, Julie. Can you talk a little bit about The Legend of Korra and why you are so excited about its return next week?
Okay. So, The Legend of Korra is in an alternate Earth where there are 4 distinct nations that are ruled by each element, which is air, water, fire, and earth. And there are a subset of those populations are called benders, where they can manipulate their element through a distinct form of martial art, basically. And the different kinds of bending are actually derived from 4 different martial arts, which is really cool. But basically, the entire Earth is either Asiatic, Oceanic, and like Native American in origin, so various shades of brown. And every generation, there's somebody who can bend all 4 elements, and they are called the Avatar. So there has been, there's a previous series called Avatar: The Last Airbender, where there was an avatar named Aang who started out as a 10-year-old boy and actually ended probably around the same age, but he was a younger avatar, so he had a lot to learn, and the series was about his kind of learning process of each element. But with this series, it's a girl. She's 17 years old. She's from the Southern Water Tribe, and so being a typical teenage girl, kind of a country mouse thrust into a city world, she has to make her way through. She makes friends and ultimately saves the world.
So this is the second season. Is there anything in the second season that you are anticipating that, I know that Steve Yeun, best known for his work on The Walking Dead,
yes,
is going to be playing one of the voices. That was big news a couple weeks ago.
Yes, he's actually showing up in only a couple episodes to fill out a backstory of the very first Avatar. So a lot of the mythology, I think, is going to be filled in, which I'm really personally excited about. So we get to see how avatars came to existence, which is awesome. And and Korra herself will have to save the spirit world as well as the physical world this time, which is fascinating. She's not actually like a spiritual person. She's kind of a jock in that way.
My thing is, it's important for me as a father to be able to show my daughter that there are opportunities for women of color to be strong, but not strong in this sense of total invincibility, because I think that's something that really comes across quite well with The Legend of Korra, is that she is the Avatar, but she's also deeply troubled and flawed and confused as any teenager, who is transitioning into adulthood should be, and typically is. It's something that even with the current age of my daughter, she's 5 now, and was 4 at the time when Legend of Korra came out, it presents some ideas that I think resonate well, especially in latter years where really beyond someone like Korra, everything else that my daughter gravitates towards is essentially a Caucasian product. It's, you've either got your Disney princesses, or you've got your or in, she's huge into My Little Pony, which, okay, I realize there's no presentation of race, and yet there is.
Oh, but there is.
Jason can chime in on that one.
On the surface, they're just, various hues of pink and purple and what have you, but clearly
they're clearly holding on to certain cultural.
Let's not talk about Korra, the African zebra.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah. Korra's not offensive at all.
Or
the Native American
buffalo.
But anyway,
or the fact that we just watched Equestria Girls, and
oh god,
when the ponies transform into humans, they're clearly of one particular background.
They morph into they morph into a Caucasian debutante type cut. Yeah, whatever. And that's a discussion that I'm sure is coming on this forum at some point.
We need to schedule that. I want to be there.
But
the Brony episode, yeah.
Yes.
yeah. But one thing that I've thought about casually, and now tonight not so casually, is I've heard people bring up with both the original Avatar as well as now with Korra, race is presented in kind of a nebulous way in the sense that there's Asian influences, there's an Asian tone, but there's nothing like you can't say for sure. Oh, okay, well, like Korra is from this place, or Korra is like, even when you brought up the discussion when you were talking about Korra, of being kind of like a Native American type Inuit, almost kind of a background. It made me think for a second. I've never actually thought about what type of ethnic background she's really connected to that is outside of the whole the whole Avatar world. And yet, at the same time, now that I'm thinking about that, I guess I'm curious: is there a need for her race to be presented more explicitly? Like, is there much? I'm drawing from less TV shows like Brave Star, which I don't, for those who are on this panel, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about.
I know Brave Star.
Yeah, I mean,
Cowboy
my thing
in
is,
space.
yeah, Native American cowboy.
Native American cowboy in space,
okay.
Yes.
But my thing is
With a robot horse.
Yeah, robot horse. But with TV shows like Brave Star, or with maybe more recently Captain Planet's another one that comes to mind as well, where race is, it's just much more clear what racial / ethnic background these characters are tied to. When it comes to Legend of Korra, because she's a female character who is not white, is there an imperative to kind of tie her to something that's much more explicitly Native American, or much more explicitly Inuit, or much more explicitly whatever, versus the way that she's currently presented? In my mind, I can make an argument for both, keeping it the way it is versus something much more explicit. But that's something I'm curious how others feel about, because at the end of the day, I'm always thinking about the classic 5-year-old question: Daddy, where's she from? Or Daddy, what is she? So.
Well, and Jason, I mean, as another father of 2 girls, and one it's in a similar age range as my own daughter and as Shawn's daughter, how would you, I like Shawn's premise of like, how would you answer that question if that comes up to your 5-year-old daughter? How would you take that if your daughter were ever to say, what is she, when Korra shows up on the screen?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing is, with any science fiction or fantasy that's set in a world that is not supposed to be our own, and the way that characters are presented, either in text or in animation, or the way they're cast on the screen, those are choices that are made by the creators, because it may be a fantasy world that's not supposed to be our own, but the creators are from our world. And so you can't escape that context. And especially with the controversy over the casting of the Avatar movie.
And when you say the Avatar, you mean The Last Airbender, for those of you who may or may not know.
Airbender, right, sorry. With the casting controversy over that, and I mean, that's where the current term race bending comes from, that controversy. The creators of the cartoon, who are, as we were talking about before the show started, who are 2 white men who, have made a point to talk about their, non-white, non-European influences for the design of the show and the characters, and the spirituality of the cultures of the show. Racial allegory in science fiction, it's a tricky thing, because, like I said, it may be a fantasy world, but it's being created in ours.
This notion of fantasy world versus our world. Raymond and I talk about this all the time, how, even though Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings are not Earth, they're Middle Earth, or they're whatever the planet Game of Thrones is on, Westeros and Easteros, those are clearly analogs for Europe. right? So like, if you were to cast a black man as Aragorn, or if you were to cast a Asian man as the Lannisters, it just wouldn't work, because when George Martin sits down, or when J.R. Tolkien sat down to write these stories, they clearly were envisioning, you know, Northern Europe for this particular clan of people, or Southern Europe for this particular clan of people. Raymond, I know,
especially because they point out within the text, within those texts, Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings, that there is some other continent with some other people, and those other people don't look like that. They look like us.
Orcs.
Or the Dothraki horde.
Yeah, right. Well, so just jumping off that point, though, Raymond, I know that you know, you enjoy, you know, Avatar. I don't know that you've watched The Legend of Korra, but you enjoy Avatar, but you have some issues with Avatar and that kind of the notion that Jason talked about, the fantasy world aspect of it all. Can you talk about that?
Well, I mean, it's just kind of it's a dangerous mishmash, right? You get to pick and choose which elements of the wuxia culture and all of that, and because people are unfamiliar with it, they didn't grow up watching Jin Young TV series or reading the books or reading those comics, that it's all kind of unfamiliar, and there is a certain level of on the one hand, yes, this is yay, it's something that is affirming for me because it's people who look like me, and I get to enjoy on a certain level. You enjoy science fiction because it brings you something new, something exotic, but packages it in a science fiction context. In fantasy, the same way. So this is fantasy, but it's specifically pulling out specific elements to be new that are historically and factually Asian things, you know, of specific cultures, but it gets to kind of pick and choose which ones it wants to use. So they're Inuit, but they're Inuits that do Tai Chi, and there's a northern tribe and a southern tribe. But I mean, it's just like, so how come if it's complex, is it complex enough, or is it not complex enough? And that kind of, it leads to problematic presentations for me. Although I do enjoy the show, it's still kind of like, yeah, that's Hongar when they're doing the earthbending.
Yeah.
But I don't know why is it Hongar, and what are the associations that I'm supposed to make of that? As someone who practices Southern Kung Fu, it's like, oh, that's weird, but I get it. And so does that mean that they're Chinese then? Because I'm looking at things, I'm going, oh, that's clearly a Chinese thing right there, right? Yeah. So they're Chinese.
Shawn, you were trying to say something?
No, I was just going to say, and see, that has a lot to do with where the question that I posed comes from, because ultimately, see, even though we can sit here and say that the whole Avatar world that the original series and then Legend of Korra takes place, and even though that's, you know, a rather kind of nondescript presentation of different concepts, different aspects of different cultures and ethnicities, what have you. At the end of the day, we as the audience will naturally gravitate towards some interpretation of it that is much more specific to our own background. And actually, when Jason reminded me of the vitriol that ensued when the Avatar movie came out, because ultimately, even though that universe is, you know, still, you know, pretty nebulous presentation of Asian concepts and Asian aspects, at the end of the day, when we saw the casting, I think universally people felt like, wait a minute, there's no way in hell that Avatar should look like this. Like, there's no way in hell that these characters should be presented the way that they are, because they clearly, in the TV show, would look a certain way. I mean, there's this whole Shaolin monk aspect with the airbenders, and again, this whole thing with northern and southern tribes, and, you know, Hungar with the earthbending. And so, anyway, having said all that, yeah, it is a fine line. Going to Raymond's point, you do walk a fine line when you are clearly referencing concepts from different ethnicities into a vehicle, but you're doing so in such a way where it's an amalgamation now. It's not just, okay, we're basing this on Southern Chinese tradition or Northern Chinese tradition or Sub-Saharan tradition, or it's just we're referencing all different types of cultural ideas in making the show. You do walk a fine line because now you're cherry picking what's relevant for us to produce, what do we think is interesting as opposed to what is just interesting in and of itself.
Well, and kind of going off that point, Julie, and something that Raymond, when he was talking about the idea of picking and choosing what Asian cultures to kind of utilize, one of the things, and Jason mentioned, is that the creators of the show are Caucasian men, and a point that you actually make in your Korra post is that most of the acting talent, the voice talent behind the scenes are also white. So how do you kind of reconcile like the idea that on the surface, if you just look at the screen, you are seeing representations of brown people, whether or not they actually equate to a particular race is nebulous, as Shawn said, but how do you reconcile that with the fact that it's still a show that's created by white people who have white people playing? I mean, for example, there's the brouhaha, the race-bending brouhaha about The Last Airbender, but you also point out that most of the voice talent is also white. So
yeah,
why
I was actually pretty surprised. I was doing research for the article just to see what the kind of racial makeup of the voice cast was, and considering that, of course, being a voice cast, it doesn't really matter if some muckety-muck up there only wants to see white people on the screen or something, right, because they're all behind the scenes. And seeing that they're overwhelmingly white was a little bit of a surprise. The way I kind of viewed it in my head when I just looked at it was, in one way, it's kind of cool because then you see all these Asian faces without the almost necessary accent or like a tinge of an accent. There are a couple accented characters kind of to show age or to show wisdom, but for the most part, the young characters, the main characters, talk in a kind of a standard American accent. And so that's cool, right? Because you don't see that often. And to normalize that is a good thing.
So before we run out of time, I wanted to talk about two more shows that are going to be debuting this fall on the Fox network, coincidentally. The shows are Sleepy Hollow and Almost Human. The reason I want to talk about these shows is that I feel like, they're a rare opportunity where we can find speculative fiction television shows that highlight lead characters that are of color. We'll start off with the show Sleepy Hollow. If you're not familiar with the show, it debuts fairly soon. It comes on next week on September 16th. And it's the Ichabod Crane story, except instead of taking place hundreds of years ago, it's a detective procedural that takes place in the 21st century because Ichabod Crane fell asleep and wakes up 200 years later.
When I beheaded him, that man didn't die. He is death itself.
Now this is crazy.
The horseman's been awakened, Ichabod.
He has returned to Sleepy Hollow.
Raymond, are you excited for this show? It sounds kind of like out there.
Yeah, no, but that's why I'm excited for it, because you said the premise is it's Ichabod. It's a Ichabod Rip Van Winkle character, right? And he wakes up and there's the headless horse. But that's only like half. That's only like a third of the premise, because it's also witches, and also he's a secret government spy. He's a secret spy for George Washington. Like, that's what? It's so many dumb things put together that sounds amazing. But you can also, like, I mean, just thinking about it now, it's like you can also then fit in all the kind of wry social commentary and how we've changed in over 200 years. And if they do it like in a really, really silly way, I think that would be hilarious. It's Alexis de Tocqueville in a Batman 66 universe. That would be amazing.
Brilliant. That's brilliant.
Well, Juliet, you have some anticipation for the show as well, I think, right?
Oh yeah, well, I wasn't planning on watching this show until you described it. It sounds intriguing.
I think Fox should pay me some money for marketing their show so well.
But yeah, I mean, it sounds like an awesome B movie, but I don't know how they're going to stretch out an entire season with that material. But we shall see. Do you guys want to take bets on when the first slavery joke is gonna show
Oh,
up.
I think it's in the pilot.
Yeah.
It's in the trailer. Yeah, it's not even in the pilot. It's in the
Oh
trailer.
my goodness. Well,
Yeah,
I
and then
love
our
that.
favorite, all of our favorite Asian American actor, John Cho, Mr. Sulu himself. I think he has a guest shot in the pilot at least, right? I think I've seen him in the trailer. We're excited about that. Does John Cho finally get his TV series off the ground? Because I think he's been in like 4 or 5 in the last couple of years that have all been canceled. So I don't know. Maybe it's not a good thing to have John Cho in the show.
John Cho in anything
as a
is a
celestial?
good news.
Say that again, Raymond.
Will he be referred as a celestial?
Maybe. Who knows, right?
Would that be Ichabod's first Asian?
Yeah, like the first Asian he sees, right? Yeah. Oh, it must be the celestial people. That's
Yeah, but that's the thing, though, right? Like, won't that get old pretty quickly?
I don't know. It might not. I'm gonna give it the benefit of the doubt. It could be great.
Well, we shall see.
Or with any Fox show, it could be gloriously terrible, and we're just watching because it's just it's wretched, and we can't. It's like a train wreck. We just can't turn away. So.
Well, and Fox never cancels right away either, right? They usually let it go for a while. Like the following got
but
back
when the
Kickstarter,
when the Kickstarter for Sleepy Hollow season 2 comes out, I'm putting $5 in. I got no problem with that. I'll put my money in for it. I want to see Ichabod Crane, Agent the Spy. Like I don't care.
It's got to be better than the Johnny Depp Tim Burton movie at the very least, right?
Why am I in this car with you? I'm required to ride with the synthetic. I'm not a huge fan of that term.
I play Dorian, the synthetic. His focus is to try and be as human as possible. I can't say that I was born, I can't say I grew in a womb or had a childhood, but I was made to feel.
Carl Urban plays a police officer in the future, and Michael Ealy is his co-star. It's a J.J. Abrams show. Jason, this is a show that you're actually pretty excited for. Can you talk a little bit about what Almost Human is supposed to be?
Yeah, well, Almost Human is basically a robot cop buddy show.
That already sounds awesome.
And, the character played by Carl Urban is a human cop who gets injured, and I think he's in a coma or something, wakes up a long time later with a robotic leg, and now all cops have to have android partners, and his new partner is played by Michael Ealy, and apparently he was an experimental model that was given emotions, and that program was not continued, but he still exists, and so now they're partners. And so I think, it sounds pretty like the Odd Couple cop buddy kind of thing is pretty played out, but like I was talking earlier about how science fiction has interesting opportunities when it plays with racial allegory. Obviously, they're going to have to, do some storylines with the whole, thing about anti-robot prejudice, especially with the Carl Urban character having, robotic parts in himself and dealing with that. So you'll have that kind of thing going on with the allegory of the robots being the other, but you have a person of color in
actually representing
2013 playing a future robot, upon which is placed, displaced this allegorical exploration of difference. There's all these things going on that, it could be really interesting or it could be really heavy-handed.
Well, that was my question. Do you think clearly just visually the subtext is there, but do you think, is J.J. Abrams capable of being, subtle with it, or do you think it's going to be hit you over the head with, look, see, they're the other?
Hopefully, what people are talking about because of Abrams and other writers involved, people are drawing comparisons to Fringe.
Mm-hmm.
And we can hope that it has the best qualities of Fringe in terms of story and mystery, and character.
It's nice to have a different take on the whole crime procedural. Shawn, if you earlier I was able to convince Julie to be interested in Sleepy Hollow simply based on my elevator pitch. If you were to do the same for what Almost Human is going to be, what would be your 3-word or maybe 5 words or less elevator pitch for how to describe Almost Human? if you had to.
5,000. No, you know what? No, sir. All kidding aside, it feels like there's a, as Jason was describing it, there's a hint of iRobot that's coming to mind for me, and then like also a TV show that goes way back, but I guess not that far back for us. I think it was on Fox. It's called Small Wonder, I think.
That goes back.
Oh, the girl.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
This whole thing of an android kind of in but just like for some reason this idea of V.I.C.I, that android, but crime fighting and black.
Brave Star, Small Wonder, dude, you are like trapped in the '80s, my man.
Immediately that imagery came to mind, and probably because I believe that show actually was on Fox. So, but either way, I listen. I will watch that. I will absolutely watch that show. If for no other reason, I'm okay with Carl Urban like kind of doing sci-fi because he's done a crap ton of it now. And then also, Ely as an android. I think I want to see the Light Brother do more than just be the Light Brother. I want to see more out of the Light Brothers. So okay, yeah, sure. Let me see me an android. that should be fun.
Well, he's an android with emotion. That would be hard.
Yeah,
to act.
I mean, listen. With the exception of being the protagonist in a Tyler Perry movie, I mean, at this point, the only other thing I've ever seen out of that crop of African American male actors is what the guy on CSI. You know, I mean, and he was kind of robotic actually in his delivery. So I can kind of
we also have J.J. Abrams to blame for making Tyler Perry part of the Star Trek canon.
Oh God,
so,
yeah.
It was that.
That's fine.
Thank you.
There's nothing wrong with Tyler Perry liking Star Trek. Don't be a hater.
So,
Star Trek's about love. Don't be hating through Star Trek. That ain't right.
Don't talk about your bowel movements over breakfast.
Are you feeling insecure? Because that's my thing, and if you take it away, I don't know what I'm bringing to this relationship.
May I suggest that you leaf through this illustrated book of sexually transmitted diseases? Come on, Daddy. All the other scientists have seen woman.
For some reason, the lives of 4 comic book geeks and their girlfriends has kind of captured the imagination of the American TV-going audience. I've always had issues with the way it depicts comic book geeks, and specifically how it depicts the character of Raj, who is the Indian friend. So before I talk about how I feel about the show, Raymond, what do you feel? How do you feel about Big Bang Theory? Do you think it's an accurate portrayal of a certain subset of fanboy culture?
You know what? It's kind of how I feel about Avatar. I enjoy it. I enjoy it, but I kind of feel like, the writers aren't necessarily real diehard comic book fans, or they're not necessarily. I mean, I don't know enough about the STEM stuff that they talk about to comment, but like, they kind of wear the milieu of being a comic book nerd, but it's not necessarily true to how a comic book nerd would be. But at the same time, they're playing up specific kinds of tropes, and I mean it's fine. I don't have as much of a problem with it now, since in the later seasons it's become much more of a relationship show, and the inclusion of the female characters, I think, has really strengthened it all around. So I'm a lot better about it now, and like Raj is now talking to girls about alcohol, like that's a huge improvement. So I mean, it's not a great arc, but hey, at least it's an Indian guy with an arc on
Right,
CBS.
Yeah, it definitely didn't ring true. Like, the way I described it to somebody recently was like, as if aliens were kind of observing us from 100,000 miles up in the sky, and they were asked to write a sitcom, like a major network sitcom about comic book geeks. Like, it just has this feeling of removal and looking through these characters from very far away that doesn't ring authentic to me, but it might just be because of the format. Like, I don't really get into the primetime sitcoms in general.
Right, 4-camera laugh tracks.
Yeah, like
sitcoms, and I mean, probably, I mean, for the question of why is it popular, I mean, I don't know why the hell, you know, 2.5 Men is still on, you know, so,
right.
But, I mean, for me, shows that sort of riff on pop culture geekiness that ring true to me are things like, well, and for the most part, Community or even Psych. You know, with all the little pop culture references that and the banter that between the two main characters on that, you know, and I think it has to do with you know, the investment in the subject matter by the writers and the creators and the producers, and you know, from what I've read, you know, the people behind Big Bang Theory, it's just a sitcom. They chose their setting and they do their research, but it's not their setting.
Right. I'm glad Jason brought up Community, Shawn. Like, if you compare Chuck Lorre, who created, you know, 2.5 Men and Big Bang Theory, to someone like a Dan Harmon, who's, you know, who was the showrunner of Community, who was gone last year, who's coming back this year. You know, there seems to be more of a authenticity into the Abed and Troy characters on Community than any of the nerds on Big Bang Theory, even though they're essentially, you know, riffing off the same things. Again, the difference is that on Big Bang Theory, they're actually, when they do a pop culture reference, they're actually referencing, you know, Star Trek or Batman or Superman. But on, you know, what's interesting about Community a lot of times is they reference, you know, fake sci-fi.
Right.
Like, they have their take on Doctor Who and all that kind of stuff. So like, but that rings more true to me, at least, than the nerds on Big Bang Theory. Can you talk a little bit about that, Shawn?
Yeah, I mean, I think that ultimately, Community asks you to take its nerd references a bit more seriously. I feel like the Big Bang Theory has, from the beginning, always been kind of a nerd culture at the lowest common denominator, or maybe a better way to put it is nerd culture that is presented in just the most basic, most easily palatable level, because ultimately I feel like the Big Bang Theory, much like most CBS shows, we're trying to get as many people watching this as possible. So if we're going to talk about anything that is referencing nerd culture, well, everybody knows Star Trek. Whether you think you're a nerd or call yourself a nerd, we know what Star Trek is. We know what comic book heroes, you know, will, you know, get people to understand.
And it's also easier to laugh at them.
Yeah. I mean, like, they're not going to. I seriously doubt that you're going to see references to, you know, Amanda Waller, for example, on The Big Bang Theory, because you're going to get a lot of people scratching their heads. But Superman, Batman, oh yes, I know who that is.
All of the STEM stuff that they talk about is actually accurate as well. Like, all of the equations you see on the boards, and these are real things. And I feel like they basically get people to research and make sure that everything that's in the background is real. But that doesn't necessarily translate to what's authentic. So, like, I think that's kind of what you were saying about how they approach the nerd culture aspect of it, right?
Yeah, and I think, like, since you were comparing it to Community, I think the difference between the Abed and Troy characters and the characters on The Big Bang Theory is that in The Big Bang Theory, especially in the early seasons, the main characters are not characters that you're supposed to relate to. They're characters that you're supposed to laugh at. They're objects of ridicule. And that's the difference, because in Community, although we laugh at Troy and Abed, we also end up relating to them. The characters, because we watch those characters end up relating to the other members of the show, and they are not nerds. And how everyone ends up bringing, everyone's a little bit of a nerd on the inside in Community, and that comes out. Whereas
even Winger, right?
Right. Yeah, Winger is very much a nerd, right? But he has learned that if he wants to be accepted, he's got to be Stefan Urkel, right?
Well, all of them. Yeah.
That's a little nice. Yeah.
I mean, so all of them are nerds in some way. I mean, that's I think with Community you have a more multi-layered representation, and which ultimately I think a more accurate representation of what I think we generally have accepted as nerd culture. I mean, each one of us who's a part of this forum, we are vastly different in backgrounds, and yet at the same time not that different, because obviously we've all gravitated within this forum for similar reasons. But with A Big Bang Theory, that exploration of the multivariedness, yeah, that's a word tonight. Multifacetedness is the word I think I was thinking of nerd culture. I don't think it's not explored nearly as much with The Big Bang Theory, nor is it's just a different type of comedy, honestly, and a different type of show at the end of the day. So, in my opinion.
Well, I think that wraps it up for our investigation of the fall TV season. I want to thank my guests, Raymond Chow, Julie Kang, Shawn Smith, and Jason Sperber. So if you're interested in any of the shows we talked about tonight, they're all coming to a TV screen near you. So just in chronological order, Legend of Korra returns on September 13th on Nickelodeon. On September 16th, Sleepy Hollow debuts on Fox. Following that, September 26th is the return of The Big Bang Theory on CBS. September 24th is the debut of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. on ABC. October 9th, you can find Arrow on the CW, and on November 4th on Fox, you will find the Carl Urban J.J. Abrams show, Almost Human, debuting as well. So thanks for being part of Hard Knock Life, Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. We'll be back next week with a special all Star Trek episode. It's going to be exciting. I want to also announce, to celebrate our Star Trek episode next Friday, and as well as the release of Star Trek Into Darkness on Tuesday, all week next week on the Nerds of Color will be Star Trek week. So we're going to be talking about Star Trek to our heart's content, and to our eyes bleed. So thank you for being part of Hard Knock Life tonight. I will see you next week.
Well, it's the N.O.C. in full color, you see me? The Hard Knock Life, comics, movies, and TV, yeah. Pop culture with a different perspective. Watch it on your screen, hit play, so check this. This is the Hard Knock Life, but not the chica kind. More like the people in the world seeking perspectives with a different line. The kids who share their interests together with a similar kind. When they said Don Glover for Spider-Man, they didn't mind. The activists, directors, comments, and the lectures. Fanboys, professional artists, and professors. Maybe a nerd who's just like you, talking about the things that you like too. So I invite you to the N.O.C. in full color, you see me? The Hard Knock Life, comics, movies, and TV, yeah. Pop culture with a different perspective. Watch it on your screen, hit play, so check this.